So what is your top strategy for innovating student success that other schools need to know, and why is that so important?
The most encouraging thing about Georgia State's approach is that it's very logical and intuitive. It doesn't require one to, have the greatest experts working 24/7 around the clock. What we've basically done at Georgia State is deliver personalized supports to students at scale. We've known for generations in higher education that individual attention works. One of the reasons that the Harvards and the Virginias and so forth are appealing institutions is they have low student to staff and faculty ratios, and students tend to get quite a bit of personalized attention. The problem for places like Georgia State, we're over 50,000 students. We don't have, our tuition is relatively modest. We don't have a high endowment, a large endowment, is that it's been very difficult at cost to deliver that kind of personalized attention to students. So what Georgia State has done is found ways to leverage technology and leverage data to personalize the student experience, to give them supports on a day-to-day basis and provide them with the information they need in a timely way so that they're not learning about what they should have done after they've made a mistake. They're getting the right information before they make the initial decision. That's all pretty simple. It's pretty intuitive. And we think that it is something that is imminently scalable. It was scalable at Morgan State in Middle Tennessee and Indian River. It was also very scalable at Georgia Perimeter College. When we took over Georgia Perimeter College via the consolidation, we did not change the tuition standards, the admission standards. Those remained exactly the same. The students are the same students who were being admitted when the graduation rate was a third the rate that it is today. What we've done is find ways to be able to support the students systematically. So part of the approach is to first get down, cross the barrier that has people thinking that we can't possibly do that. This is beyond our control. I've heard some people to say that, oh, no, we could never do what Georgia State has done because Georgia State has all these great systems in place. Well, I wish you could see where we were in 2008. Our data systems wouldn't even allow me to get accurate information about what student was majoring in what field. We didn't even have an accurate list of our majors. We had student to advisor ratios that in some of our colleges were 11 to 1,200 students for every advisor. We had nothing. But what we've been able to do is systematically use our data in order to implement better supports for students. And then this is the second part of what I would use as an argument to try to sway campuses to go down this pathway. There's a positive ROI. These programs pay for themselves. In fact, they more than pay for themselves. So over the last decade, Georgia State has more than doubled the number of low-income students we enroll. During that same decade, we've improved our bond rating. That is counter to the logic of a lot of so-called pundits out there. But the reality is when you hold on to students, even if you're doing it purely for the moral reasons of it's the right thing to do, you also hold on to dollars and resources. Every 1% we improve our retention rates at Georgia State, worth about $3.3 million a year in additional tuition and fee revenues. So part of the kind of package here, part of the message is that you can do the right thing and it will actually help your institution be financially solvent and secure at the same time. And more than that, the more effective you are in beginning to move these numbers, the more resources it provides for you to do additional things in the subsequent year. And that's just how Georgia State has turned from a campus 10, 12 years ago where you would not see any signs of life, where the student success area was as non-existent as you can possibly imagine, at least by certain measures, to one now that sometimes campuses find intimidating because we have so much going on. It wasn't due to some great windfall that some foundation gave us $20 or $30 million. It was from moving the needle and then reinvesting some of those resources the next year into additional supports for students so that you could move the needle further. There's been never a year at Georgia State where we've improved graduation rates more than a couple points. But doing that every year for a decade means our graduation rates are up 23 points overall, and by more than 40 points for our African American students and our Hispanic students. That's how these kind of transformations come about.
When other people will listen to the story, it just seems overwhelming, right? Because it's like all these moving pieces in such a large institution. And I think that's where you see, they see the success, the end point, right? And then how did that all happen at one point? So for a university like that wants to get in, but they just see it so impossible. If let's say the NISS had the capacity to focus in one initiative, right, just to get started, what is the most critical concern in student success that needs to be addressed immediately?
Yeah, the starting point, it was the starting point for Georgia State, but it's also going to be the starting point for our support of other campuses as well, is making sure that you have the foundations in place to be able to implement these programs. It absolutely is not the first step to go out to some expensive vendor and buy their predictive analytics package, right? Because that's not the answer. It could be the solution in conjunction with other things, but those other things have to come first. And so the diagnostic that I referred to a little earlier, that campuses that want our consulting help will first go through a several month period of diagnostics. We'll be looking for a couple things. What I think is really important is, one, to have leadership in place. We've worked with campuses that are very well-meaning, but if the provost and the president are fighting and on different pages about where to go and where to put priorities and so forth, that's not a good time to then be investing in these technologies or paying some third-party vendor to provide you with predictive analytics and so forth. So there are administrative structures and leadership issues that need to be in place. The second big component we'll be looking for are data and data capabilities. This doesn't mean you have to have the predictive analytics in place. In fact, part of what the NIST will help campuses do is get to the point where they can take their data and use it to develop predictive analytics or analytics that help you to package students more efficiently for institutional aid and so forth. But you have to have some of the fundamental data in place. I mentioned a few minutes ago that when I took over this job in 2008 and started leading Georgia State student success efforts, I went to try to talk to chairs about some of the success rates of their majors. We did not have good, reliable data on who the majors were. The chairs would push back and say, oh, this can't be right because you don't have this student listed and I know this student is a major and so forth. And they were right. We didn't have good, accurate data about which students were majoring in what areas. So until we got that under control and until we began to define what is the pathway a student needs to take to complete a chemistry major, embarrassingly, for some of our academic majors 10 years ago, as we began to try to move into the area of predictive analytics, we couldn't even get the faculty to tell us what course should students take in what order. What is the sequence they should subscribe to? That's important. And until you get some of those fundamentals in place, that you don't need to be investing in expensive analytics packages and data systems and so forth. So that's where I would have campuses start, and that's where we will expect campuses to start, in building the foundations that will allow them to use efficiently the kind of tools that will be effective. In fact, in a number of ways, the tools are almost a secondary matter. They're certainly not the most expensive thing we invest in. We work with a number of technology partners, including very proudly Steppingblocks, who's been a great ally in our work, especially in the career space. But that's not really the essence of what we do. It's not the hardest part of what we do, picking vendors or even paying the vendors we work with. The hardest thing we do and the most expensive thing we do is getting our own house in order, right? Getting a complicated group of individuals who in many cases have been doing their jobs for a long time to recognize that we might need to approach things in a different way. And that might mean on many days that they have to do things differently than they've been doing them in the past. And when you can create a culture, and that's why leadership is so important, where people recognize, although those kind of sacrifices are immediate and painful, they will result in much greater rewards in helping students, but greater rewards in the institution being more solvent and being able to hire additional staff, and those staff having a more secure job and so forth. That process of convincing people to buy into the whole process is really the first step in this whole process working.
Innovating in higher ed can face a bunch of objections. I mean, everywhere. We've seen that. I think you touched on the point that it really starts with the leadership. If the leadership is not there, you can have a lot of people invested in the idea, but if the house is not in order, it's really not going to be executed. But if your audience experiences this when launching their own student success strategies, how do they overcome that?
Yeah, I think there are some concrete steps that can be taken, and they've been proven to work not only at Georgia State, but some of the other partner schools we work with. One, I think it's important to work with data, collect data, do careful analysis of the impact of programs. We've had very small programs that, $35,000 for a new initiative, but we've used outside evaluators at times to track the data and do the assessments. Why? Because it's a tough audience, right? Faculty members are often the smartest people in any room. They were the A students in every class. They're hard to convince, but almost all of them speak a common language, whatever they teach. And the common language is evidence, right? They've been taught through their PhD work or their doctoral or other graduate programs to respect and use evidence. And so leading with the evidence is really critical, not only because it can convince people that maybe the way they looked at something needs to be rethought, but also because it provides a less accusatory way to bring about change. If you go into a room of faculty or staff and say, you're not doing good work and you need to change what you're doing, I can tell you by experience how that will go, and it will not go well. If, on the other hand, you say, we've been looking at some data sets here and really found an interesting and kind of anomalous discovery in the data, really love your help in trying to understand what's going on here and so forth, you begin to create partners who become part of the conversation. The second thing I would advise is don't start by changing other people or arguing that other people change. Start by changing yourself. So quite intentionally at Georgia State, as we began what became a decade-long effort to improve graduation rates, we started with administrative processes. We didn't start by going into the faculty and saying, you need to change the way you're grading, or you need to change the way you're teaching your subject matter because students are not learning enough and so forth. We said instead, we need to change the way we advise students. We need to change the way we support them in the summer before they first enroll in college. We need to change the way we register them or package them for financial aid. This was very effective from an outcomes perspective because changing these administrative processes really did benefit students in profound ways, in fact, ways larger and more impactful than we could have imagined. So what Georgia State did by focusing initially on administrative processes is make a public statement that this was not all about pointing fingers at others. This was recognizing that these problems are pervasive throughout the university. And one of the net benefits of starting with administrative processes is it brought faculty along, right? Faculty who initially might have been very reluctant to, support yet another administrator saying, we're going to make major changes at the university, saw these changes in place in areas outside their day-to-day work. And in many cases then came to us and said, I think we can do a better job in the way we do our work as well. A good example of this is in our economics classes. Once we started predictive analytics and there was an alert system, an early alert to indicate if a student was struggling on, for instance, early quizzes in a class, we began to seeing a lot of alerts going off in the early stages of micro and macroeconomics, basic economic courses. Well, what the faculty ultimately did is said, if all these alerts are going off, maybe the students are not understanding the material as well as we thought they would. And maybe we need to go back and rework the early sections of those classes. So the solution in that instance was not to allow the alerts to continue to go off, but find a way so that the students don't struggle and the alerts are not triggered at the degree that they once were. So those are the kind of secondary benefits that come from starting with the right kind of emphasis. And the last thing I'll observe about kind of changing the hearts and minds of faculty and staff across campuses is most faculty and staff are attracted to institutions, attracted to higher ed, not because it's going to pay them the best, but because they really want to make a difference. Places like Georgia State, this is particularly true, where people know the profile of the average Georgia State student. We're 75% non-white, were 60% low income. They come to Georgia State willingly because they want to make a difference in the lives of these individuals. The problem is higher education and its big bureaucracy, including that at Georgia State until recently, has the very potent ability to deaden that enthusiasm, right? It's a big bureaucracy. You come in enthusiastically, and then you try to make a change and you find that the system doesn't listen to you. It kind of swallows up your energy. And a few years later, you're feeling, why even bother? Because I can try hard and it doesn't seem to make any difference at all. So I think the third thing that really benefits these kind of changes on campus is showing and illustrating and documenting that these programs, even at the small scale initially, can make a difference. Because what it does is lights the fire, right? Or reignites the fire that was once there. And people begin to believe, you know, if I change what I do, it might make a difference as well. And I think that may be the single most powerful thing we've done at Georgia State. It's not any one individual or any one office. It's showing the whole campus that by being innovative, by being willing to be self-critical, by using data in a systematic way, you can make a difference. And once that is believed, that can be, you know, can light a fire that crosses all of campus and really benefits tens of thousands of students.
So Tim, that's interesting. The first of it, as you know, I mean, my passion is data-driven initiatives, right? And my passion is in helping the students succeed with data. We know data is one of the key components for NISS, as you mentioned before. But there's a lot of data, right? There's a lot of components. There's data like the outcomes data that we provide. There's also, you talk about the chatbot data. You collect the information that they use in the chatbots. There's the data that is predictive on behaviors, whether someone is going to fail or not, right? So what are the, you know, again, if someone is starting and they need to look at all these data-driven initiatives, what are the key initiatives to get started, or at least the ones that if you could lay out, the ones that would be required to build a student success program?
Yeah, a good question. We've been using data in increasingly nuanced fashion. And, you know, I mentioned earlier that we're tracking every student every day for 800 risk factors. But I also want to offer some comfort to those campuses that may be just starting out along this pathway, which is you don't have to track 800 risk factors every day to make a difference. In fact, in many cases, the data that is most impactful is the simplest data. But the trick is, and this is not done on enough campuses and wasn't done at Georgia State until recently, is using the data in a timely and systematic fashion. So a simple example is one of the most telling and predictive early indicators of a student who's going to struggle is a student who drops or withdraws from a course in the middle of a semester. You know, talk about an early warning sign. The student has signed up for the course, they've paid for the course, and in the middle of the semester, they're bailing on the course. There's something going on there. Either they're overwhelmed academically or they have something going on in their personal life, financial or emotional or whatever. That's the time to reach out. That's not a complicated data point, right? Every registrar across the country has a record of when the student withdraws from the class. But how many campuses, and Georgia State was no better until recently, how many campuses systematically say, you know, we're not going to wait 6 months to find out why that student bailed on the class. Ask them, you know, after the fact, you know, sorry that you signed up for this course. It was a required course, but you didn't end up completing it. Why? Why not intervene immediately? By doing so systematically, you might be able to resolve problems that could become much deeper for that particular student. In some cases, the student may be acting rashly too. You know that everybody in organic chemistry gets a D on the first quiz. This is a straight A student getting their first D and is bailing on the course. But it's not going to be any better next semester. They're going to get a D on the first quiz in the next semester too. So having that conversation can actually save them money, save them time, and put them back on path again. So a really simple data point. Another simple data point we've used at Georgia State is we found that the first grade a student gets in his or her major is highly predictive of their chances of graduating on time. You know, the difference between a student who gets an A or B in their first course in their major and who gets a C is the difference at Georgia State between a 75% graduation rate for the first group or a 25% graduation rate for the students who get a C in their first course in the major. That's not a complicated data point. You don't need some fancy analytics package to know what was the grade the student got in their first major. But how many campuses are using that data point systematically to look at the students, intervene and help the students who need help before 75% of them, if they get a C in that first class, go off, take upper level work and begin to turn those C grades into Ds and Fs, and in many cases drop out and so forth. So that's the logic here. Is there's lots of data out there. It can be completely overwhelming. We're not messaging that you need overwhelming amounts of data and data for data's sake. What we're saying is you need to understand which data are important and then use those data in a timely and systematic fashion.
Right. We talked a lot about the data for the current students, right? And one of the things we'll look at a lot about is the outcomes data. What happens to those alumni once they graduate and the tracking of those things? How does that play a role with the additional departments, alumni relations, advancement, whatever other groups you have out there that are also fetching the students, identifying how they did, and putting this all together? How does that come together for student success?
Having better outcome data about what happens with our students after they graduate is part of the same story I've been telling throughout this discussion, Carlo, because what we found is it's another instance of providing students with the right information in a timely fashion so that they could make good decisions. So we used to be, as recently as 3 or so years ago, before we began working with your team, we would do traditional alumni surveys and we would get 3 to 4% response rates. We would want to tell the students what happens if you major in political science, but we wouldn't get any data back from our graduates, any useful data. More recently, with the support of your tools, we've been able to identify 170, 180,000 of our alums and identify things like, if you were a political science major 5 years ago, what are you likely to be doing now? And what is your salary likely to be now? And we're putting that information in the hands of our students immediately, not when they're seniors and they can't act or change their college choices based on the data, but when they're in their first year and throughout their academic careers. They can see that data, they can consult it, they go onto the political science website, they can look at what other political science majors are doing, make decisions, take different courses and so forth as a result of it. What we found is just from informing students in more structured way about career outcomes after they graduate, it changes their behavior while they're students at Georgia State. We've had a significant drop over the last 5 or so years in the number of students changing majors, especially changing majors after their first year, because they have better understanding about the major they're choosing the first time through looking at this data. That may seem kind of an arcane data point metric. Well, we've dropped the number of students changing majors after the first year, but it means that more students are graduating with less debt. It means fewer students are running out of aid before they finish any degree program and hence drop out without a degree and so forth. So it's very much part of what we're doing at Georgia State to try to equip students with better and more timely information so they can make more informed decisions. It certainly benefits other offices as well. Our alumni affairs office, with better data can interact with alumni in more effective fashion. Somebody's traveling to the Seattle area, they can know exactly who our former students are in that area, what they majored in, what kind of careers they have and so forth. That's great, and I support that. That's not my day-to-day job. My day-to-day job is seeing if we can get students to graduate and be successful at Georgia State. And what I can tell you is that by providing students with better information, they are going to be much more likely to make informed decisions. And that always works in support of student success goals and outcomes.
Well, Tim, yeah, this is I think it's a super exciting initiative. So we're super excited to support you in every single way we can. And get the word out as much as we can. Because again, our passion is, it starts at the core, the student, right? And I think you have an unintended consequence of having very positive ROI for the institution, because that's what happens, right? When you help the students and they succeed, naturally that is the best possible outcome for the university as a whole. So I think that's super exciting. Love to see what happens, going forward through 2021, seeing more universities signing up and starting to incorporate. It's a lengthy process. It's not something that happens overnight, but I think we'll keep spreading. As you learn things like this, I'd love to keep sharing so we can share that with our partners to help them figure out what some of these next steps will be. But yeah, this is the end of the interview. Tim, thank you so much for sharing all these insights with us. I think we're gonna slice and dice and start sharing this information. So again, happy to support you. Thank you so much, and I hope to hear more through the course of 2021.
Thank you, Carlo. Thank you for talking today, but also thank you for all you're doing to support students as well. We consider you a valued partner.
Excellent. Thank you, Tim. Well, this concludes our interview with Dr. Renick. If you want to learn more about the National Institute of Student Success, and if you'd like to know how Steppingblocks can help you, please visit us at steppingblocks.com or contact us at team@steppingblocks.com. Hope to talk to you soon.